Hey, welcome back to Growth 101. So this module, we're going to focus on an intro to customer acquisition. Now, obviously, customer acquisition is a really broad concept. I do have a bunch of supplemental content in various lessons throughout Growth 101, but I want to just walk you through some of the key elements that I will look at when thinking about customer acquisition, kind of regardless of industry or even business type. So the first area of focus, again, coming back to metrics, is around some of the metrics that we care about. And so when we think about customer acquisition, there's some performance components that we want to kind of dig into and really get to know and understand what works and what doesn't work for our business. And the four components that we're going to typically measure include metrics at the top of funnel. Again, revisiting the EPAG or your endpoint acquisition goal, that impact between the handoff between acquisition and activation. There's going to be a revenue impact, and then there's going to be a cost impact. So customer acquisition costs and budgets are kind of the two main drivers there that we're going to look at. And we'll kind of go into each of these in detail. So when you look at the top of funnel metrics for customer acquisition, you're going to mostly be looking at things like reach and impressions, clicks, and click-through rates. And I'll show some examples of data along the way here. So this is a Facebook and Instagram example looking at 4 different weeks of growth through various different campaigns that we've run. And notice the impressions, the clicks, and then the click-through rate are kind of the metrics that we care about here. Now, why do you care about these? You care about these because your reach metrics are going to be your first signal in a channel that tell you whether or not that channel is potentially viable. So if you get really low reach and you just can't get your content in front of people, then you likely need to expand your audience. A lot of first-time marketers here make mistakes around thinking that they have to do really granular audience tuning and targeting and demographic targeting and everything else, when really, especially in the days of iOS 14.5 and things that are happening in the market and industry kind of here in early 2021 or mid 2021, I should say, is you really probably want to let some of the algorithms do the work within these platforms. But if you're getting too low of reach and you are doing a lot of this really granular targeting, think about expanding that audience. Conversely, if you've got great reach, but you can't drive clicks, or you've got a really low click-through rate or a really low engagement score within these different channels, you might have a targeting problem, or more likely your creative and messaging is just not resonating with your target audience, and you really start there. EPAG helps you keep all of your campaigns aligned with specific goals. And so when you think about EPAG, again, this could be trials, this could be a demo sign up, this could be an email capture. This is going to be a metric that you're going to look at regardless of the campaign type or channel that you're in. And you want to kind of get to a point where you've got an apples to apples comparison with this EPAG. So if you're a startup and free trials are your number one metric that you're tracking for EPAG, you're going to want to look at that across the different types of campaigns that you run. And you'll even want to show what EPAG trial conversion might look like for this example here, Facebook and Instagram versus say like SEO, and kind of how that trial is actually happening, those conversion rates to trials happening regardless of the channel that you might be in, and you can kind of tune as you go. So this is again a snapshot of impressions, clicks, click-through rate at the top of funnel, and then layering in the EPAG. I'm using number of trials and then a click-to-trial ratio for this example that I'm showing here. And what you want to see is that over time, your click-to-trial, that EPAG metric, both increases in terms of volume and velocity, as well as in performance when you look at kind of the next layer up, that click to trial. Am I getting a higher percentage of people to get into that trial through better marketing, better targeting, and by having a better landing page experience and a better product? EPAG is going to be universal. You're going to normalize that across your channels. And if you can't hit your endpoint acquisition goals here, let's say that you're a startup and you're trying to get 20 new trials a week. If you just can't get those conversions to happen, but you're getting a high amount of traffic, for example, then you're probably driving just a lower quality amount of traffic, and maybe that's unqualified. And you kind of have to look top of funnel and again, look at your creative and your messaging. When done well, EPAG becomes a proxy for your true revenue metrics. So you could start to build some predictability in your model when you look at EPAG kind of across the board. Now, if you've got a long sales lead time, your EPAG metric is going to be a good indicator of future downstream volume for what that sales conversion might look like. And you can build your costs and cost structures and growth model off of that, basically. When you layer in revenue now, this is, again, I'm showing number of new subscribers who would come from those trials. And then I'm going to layer in the cost per action, the customer acquisition cost, and some of the budget side of things, because at the end of the day, we're either spending time or we're spending money in a channel. And this is kind of what we're going to look at in terms of metrics here. Now, why do we look at these? You're going to look at CPC, cost per action, customer acquisition cost, because these are going to be what drives your budget. Your CAC is important over time, but some of these other metrics are also going to be faster in terms of giving you a signal of what's working and what's not working. So a low CPC with a high cost per action or high EPAG metric there may indicate that you've got an activation problem, or your landing page isn't great, or something else is happening. Maybe your page speed is too low on mobile, and you just don't have the ability to convert users yet. So you have to go back to the drawing board and constantly be looking for improvements at each stage of that journey. And then lastly, if you're planning to raise money, investors love metrics around budgets and CAC and cost per action. The smarter you can kind of walk people through this model, and the more you own these numbers, the better off you're going to be when it comes to that fundraising piece. Okay, so on the organic side, you're not really going to be layering in a budget or a CPC, CPA, or CAC, really. It's really just kind of that first half of those metrics that you're going to look at. But I'd strongly urge you to still look at the performance metrics on the organic side, just as if you would on the paid side, because you're still spending time there, right? So here's just a couple different examples of how I would track different types of organic campaigns. The first one was a LinkedIn campaign, and the next one would be an SEO keyword ranking campaign. Your top of funnel metric for organic is basically going to be reach. You can include other metrics as you see fit with your business. It's not a one size fits all necessarily. You're going to want to look though at the conversion rates for organic as if you were looking at paid as well. And so for example, I want to start to compare apples to apples metrics. So what's happening if I go spend money on Twitter versus Instagram? What's my cost per click on Twitter paid versus Instagram paid or Facebook paid? What's the cost per install or the cost per action or my EPAG metric on Instagram versus Google SEM, for example, right? So now you start to get a broader sense of what those channel-based specifics are going to be. And then you want to look at this more holistically, so organic versus non-organic. And just remember, some channels are going to drive really cheap clicks, but give you poor EPAG metrics. Those conversion metrics just won't be great on some channels, and vice versa. There's a couple ways to measure customer acquisition costs. I'm going to blow through this quickly because this is a whole topic that you're going to want to spend some time on, but I want to give you kind of a primer. You're going to want to look at customer acquisition costs at the campaign level, at the channel level, and at the paid full level. So everything that you're doing on the paid side, as well as blended, where you kind of layer in all the organic work that you're doing. That last item 4 here, blended CAC, is typically what startups will use when investors will ask, well, what's your CAC? You're going to kind of look at everything blended together. You may have a paid CAC and then a blended CAC, where it's like, my paid CAC is $500 and my blended is $400 because we've got good organic reach. Okay, switching gears, moving into choosing acquisition channels now. So there's some considerations when you want to think about what acquisition channels you're going to work with. Number 1 is your ability to find and target users in the channel. Number 2 is the volume that you can get from that channel. 3 are costs. And 4 is, can you actually win and be profitable in that channel? So the first consideration here is finding and targeting users in the channel. There's a few different ways that customers find you. They find you because they have high intentionality or high intent. You may find them because of demographic targeting or psychographic targeting, or there might be another tactic at play like a referral or word of mouth. Maybe even out of home, and some other strategies could work there. With intent-based targeting, a user likely knows that they're looking for a solution like yours and they seek it out. Or they know your brand and they search for it. Airbnb is a great example of this, or Google. You just go to Google to do searches now, right? Children's Museum Chicago, where to get an oil change, This Week in Startups, Growth University. These are all examples of intent-based targeting where the user is actually seeking the solution that they've got a problem for, or they're just looking for something that they know they're looking for. 2 different use cases here. One is Google search results, which we're all familiar with, and the other here is Pinterest, actually. Many folks don't know that Pinterest actually has a very great high intent search algorithm built in, and it's very useful for marketers, and it's fairly cost effective to get in front of people. You can notice this promoted tweet by Home Depot when I'm looking for Children's Museum Chicago. Demographic targeting is where you look for users who match characteristics that you think are relevant, and you inject your brand into the place where they hang out. And this is going to be a lot lower intent. So you may target by all sorts of things, including what they like to do for fun or some kind of affinity. There's a million ways to use this. Here's an example here. I'll kind of blow through this quickly, but you can set up really, really finely tuned demographic-based targeting in a lot of the ad platforms. When you layer in psychographic, this is more kind of behavioral-based targeting. And again, you can kind of go down the rabbit hole here and get really, really, really deep in terms of psychographic and demographic targeting. And sometimes you want to do that. And oftentimes when you're just getting started, you actually want to start more broadly. Other ways that people find you: referrals, word of mouth. Users in these scenarios may or may not have intent, but at some point they were made aware about your brand. And a way to think about this for your brand is think about the last time you bought something that a friend or a colleague told you about. How did they describe it? How would you describe your product back to the person? How would you describe your product back to your friend who you want to go tell a friend about your product, right? So this is going to help you with some of the messaging around how you position your brand. To kind of wrap up that section, I like to look at the awareness as a flow, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. You could pause here if you want to kind of look at this, but basically it starts with is the user aware of a problem or not? And based on that, you'll either go the solution route or not. And so you can kind of follow this chart around and get to the end, and it'll give you some ideas on kind of where to get started. The next consideration is volume. So you want to look kind of mid to long term when you're thinking about marketing channels is how much potential can I get out of that channel over time? Short term, though, you really just want to get started. Any channel may work for you, but not every channel is going to scale. So I always say, like, you're never going to build a $100 million ARR business on Quora alone. And eventually what's going to happen is you're going to reach diminishing returns on your efforts. So regardless of the channel, when you get started, you're probably going to see high costs because you don't know what you're doing. Then the costs are going to drop. You're going to get a lot better. And then as you scale, the costs are going to go up and the efficiency is going to go down. Now, in the big channels like Google and Facebook, this could take years before you hit that ceiling. But in the smaller channels, it will happen relatively quickly if you've got a healthy budget. These are some charts here around percentage of channel use and daily active users. I mean, this is basically, these are the places where people hang out. Again, you can pause here if you want, but there's not that many places where people hang out online that you can get in front of them with. So take a second here and kind of browse this. The next consideration is the cost to leverage a channel. So some channels are going to be better fits for your brand, and others are going to come with what I call a setup tax. So Snapchat might be amazing for a consumer startup with a new product that you have out in the wild, but you're going to need to feed Snapchat a lot of really engaging, highly engaging, creative content. Other channels are going to have minimum spends. It's going to be more expensive to get started. Others are going to have a very high cost per engagement. And organic channels likely could work for a lot of your brands, especially if they're high intent. So if you're a brand and you've got high intentionality, users know they're seeking a solution to a problem that they have, and you are that solution, then organic might be great for you. If you're not in that boat, then organic's going to be a lot more slow for you. So you have to kind of consider those and look at the time commitment that you're going to spend, which means that you have to really look at channels that you can leverage the highest return on spend and time, right? You have money and you have time. And those are really the two elements that you have to work with. Go where you feel most comfortable and ask yourself some questions when you're getting started. Who on my team is going to help? Do you have design capabilities? Can you produce videos? Are you like me? I'm terrible at creative. So SEM for me is always a great place for me to start with, or I could do long form written content. Like, I'm good at those two things, but I'm not great at pretty much anything else. So those are going to be better channel fits for me personally. Now, once I introduce my team to the mix, then it's a whole different story. So you have to think about kind of who's going to be helping you along the way. Spend and speed. Are you budget constrained? Are you well funded? Do you need to get a signal immediately to appease investors? Are you trying to raise money? What are your competitors doing? You just have to find the right balance here. There's no right or wrong answer, but just remember that nothing is free. I hear a lot of founders say, well, I don't do any paid advertising. It's just not for me. You know what? It doesn't really matter what your opinion is about that topic, whether paid or organic is going to or not going to work. I would urge you to go and test it. There's many, many variables, and you won't really know until you try, and nothing is free. If you spend the next year building out a robust content strategy and SEO plan, but you get no customers, you just wasted a year. Conversely, if you don't invest it all in organic and you spend the $1 million that you just raised on paid ads and you can't convert anybody, you'll also go out of business. So find that healthy balance and just be objective in terms of looking at how to use that spend versus speed. The last consideration is your ability to win in a channel. So we're going to look at cost per win here. You really only win in a channel when your return on investment is high and there's potential volume from that channel. If your $40 product costs $10 to get a lead and you close 20% of your leads, you lose money every time. It costs you $50. So 5 leads, 20%, one converts. It costs you $50 to sell a $40 product. And that doesn't win and you're not going to scale that. That being said, you can give yourself some time here to figure it out. Most channels can be optimized. And again, not all are going to scale. So just be ready to kind of go wide and run a lot of different channel-based experiments. I like to look at cost versus intent when looking at different channels. So on the far bottom left here, you've got Twitter, which is very low intent, low cost. You'll get a lot of clicks for very cheap, but you're likely not going to convert a lot of that audience. And on the upper right here is Google search, both organic and paid search. On the paid search side, it may cost you a lot of money. On the organic side, it might cost you a lot of time to build articles and content that's going to resonate. But the intentionality is probably going to be there with your audience. They're going to find you because they went looking for a solution to a problem.